What up? I have worked at a woodworking store for years, probably too many years. And I did it all so you don't have to. I have spent years now learning about all realms of woodworking and solving people's problems, giving people advice, and so on. And I thought I would make a video going over some of the most common questions I get or advice I have to give, specifically on finishing, because a lot of people just don't get it. And it's not that hard. It's not as complicated as it seems at first, but there's a lot of information to know. And I'm going to try to keep it simple for you and just go over some of the most common things, like I said, that I get asked and that I give advice on. One of the most common things I get questions about is finishes on cutting boards or butcher blocks. Some people do not understand that a cutting board should not be sealed. Anything that you're going to be dragging a knife across or cutting on or slicing on, you don't want to put an actual sealing coat on. A sealing coat would be any of your film forming finishes, meaning polyurethanes, lacquers, acrylics, epoxies, anything like that. These are all types of finishes that will create a film over the wood and a barrier between the wood and the environment, whatever else, food, uh, dishes, things like that. You're basically coating the wood in plastic. Think of it that way. You're giving it a thin film of plastic. Now, there are plastic cutting boards, but as you may have noticed if you've ever had one, they look like crap after not very many uses. And that's because they get all cut up. You've got knife marks in them. They're usually those knife marks get like black and like grimy. That's what's going to happen to your cutting board if you put an actual sealer on it, or anything that you're going to be dragging a knife across. That's what's going to happen. So, what should you put on a cutting board, butcher block, similar item? Well, you should really be putting something natural, uh, and something that you're just going to have to reapply. That's just how it's going to go. There's not going to be any low maintenance finishes for cutting boards. Mineral oil, beeswax, a mixture of the two. There are other finishes out there for cutting boards that have an assortment of different oils and waxes in them. Be like Walrus Oil brand has like some citrus oils, coconut oil, whole lot of different stuff. You'll see things like that. For the most part, it doesn't really matter that much, in my opinion and my experience. I mean, really, if you soak a board in mineral oil, it's going to give you, looks wise, it's going to enhance the grain, but you will need to reapply it. Mineral oil does not cure. Certain natural oils do skin over to a certain extent. That would be things like linseed oil or tung oil. These are both natural oils that will dry. They will create kind of a skin, but nothing natural is going to be very protective. Um, so things like, again, those oils, shellacs, which shellac is a bit of a different beast because it is a film forming finish, but it is food safe. It's still not very durable. None of these natural finishes are going to be all that durable. They're not very chemical resistant. They're not very moisture resistant. Tung oil out of the natural, just pure regular natural oils between it and linseed and some of the other like walnut oil. Tung oil tends to have slightly better moisture resistance, but it's not much. We're talking very, very marginal differences there. Probably one of the next most common things I get asked about is stain matching. And this is something I've personally struggled with a lot. And that's because stain matching is not easy. It isn't easy to do, it isn't easy to get right because there's more than just the color to it. Sometimes it's easy, and those times are a blessing when you have to stain match something and it's a simple color. You know, the best thing to do always is to take a sample of whatever it is you're trying to match, bring it to the store, or whoever has the best selection of stains, hold it up to samples and see what looks the best. But when you're trying to like restore something, repair something, match an existing stain, there's so many factors at play, and it's more than just the color. There is toning to that may be there. There is like layers of color. Like you may have like a reddish color with a gold glow beneath it. Um, and there's ways to achieve that, certainly, but there's also things like opacity. Some colors are going to look much more solid. The pigment is going to look much more solid. Some are going to look much less solid, where the like something that's been dyed. You can clearly see the grain of the wood. There is no obstruction between it. On the opposite end of the spectrum with stain, you have something like gel stain, which is super easy to use. Um, However, it is such heavy pigment that it will obstruct the grain slightly and give you more of an opaque look. For these reasons, on restoration projects, a lot of times it is easier to just start from scratch, refinish something with a, you know, if you're redoing a piece of furniture, it may behoove you just to strip it, restain it, refinish it, versus trying to match color. Now, there are products out there that will help you greatly with restoration. Things like Howard's Restore Finish. You can get stellar results out of that. It really will. If you're trying to like deal with scratches, dings, dents, areas of veneer that may have been chipped off, small areas, that is, it can help conceal those types of issues very well. However, it isn't a cure all, and there are a lot of times when it isn't going to do the trick. Now, I'm not saying you can't do stain matching, I'm not saying not to try it. Definitely do it. But what it's going to take is a lot of playing around and a lot of experimenting with a lot of different products to get right. And I've found there's not a bunch of excellent resources out there on tips and techniques. I've hunted all over online. I've read books. There's some stuff out there, but it really is a niche thing, and it's quite a trick to do that kind of work oftentimes. So again, I'm not saying don't do it, but if you're doing it for a customer, be realistic about it with yourself. If you don't have experience with it, tell them you're going to have to play around with it. You're going to have to experiment with different products until you just kind of get it right. Now, this actually could actually possibly have been the most asked question. It's definitely up there, and I maybe should have put this first, but that would be, what is just the easiest stain to use? What is going to give me the easiest time? What's the most cooperative? And by far, that is gel stains. Um, Now, there's a lot of different brands out there. I'd highly recommend General Finishes. They are expensive, but it's going to give you so much more ease of use. It's worth it. It's very much worth it. And I haven't played around with a lot of the other brands out there, but the nature of gel stain, how it works is almost like a paint, which is what makes it so easy, is it sits entirely on the surface of the wood. It doesn't penetrate into the wood. So it acts like a paint, but it looks like a stain. You can see the grain of the wood through it. The benefits of this are little to no prep work, for one thing, which that alone is a huge time saver and energy saver. Um, a very professional, consistent look. You don't ever have issues with blotchy or patchiness on your surface because that look stems from stain when you apply it, regular stains, be it regular oil-based, water-based stain. When you apply that to a wood surface, in some areas of the wood, it's going to absorb deeper. In other areas of the wood, it's going to not absorb quite as deep unless you do something to prep the wood, like put down a sanding sealer or conditioner, something like that. Gel stain just doesn't have that issue because it doesn't penetrate. Um, and it gives you a very professional, clean look. It should not be avoided as a stain. I would highly recommend it. You know, sometimes you just can't find the color you're looking for, and General Finishes other stains are fantastic. I really like the colors in their water-based line, and as far as water-based stain goes, theirs is the easiest I've ever used, and still really doesn't have much of an issue with blotchiness or patchiness, even on some more difficult woods. But far and away, the easiest thing to use and the most cooperative is going to be the gel stains, and I'd highly recommend them. Another very common concern and question from people I've noticed is oil and water. When do you use what? Can you use this with that? And the long and short of it is you can use whatever under or over whatever as long as it's dried. Okay, so you can use an oil-based stain and a water-based top coat as long as the oil-based stain has been given plenty of time to dry, to cure, really. You're going to have to give it a few days at minimum if you're doing an oil stain and then wanting to do a water-based top coat. On the opposite end, though, or vice versa, uh, water-based stuff dries much quicker. So if you're doing a water-based stain, you can then go and probably the next day or so put a oil-based top coat over top of that. Um, and that's totally fine. As long as it's dry, it's okay to mix oil and water because they're not really mixing at that point. The oil is no the finish is the stain is no longer oily or watery. It is now just pigment that is left on the wood, and therefore you can put the other one over it. Um, Now that is a bit different when it comes to top coats and things like mixing top coats. You don't generally want to do that. What I mean by that is it is not a good idea if you have like a lacquered table. Let's say you have a lacquered tabletop. It is not a good idea to go and try to put a polyurethane finish over that. It will not last. It's not going to hold up. You're putting, like I said earlier, essentially a layer of plastic over the wood. Some plastics are harder than others, some are more flexible than others. If you put a harder one over a softer one, it's not going to hold up, and some just won't adhere to each other right. So, that is generally not a good idea to do. You're much better off figuring out what the original finish was and matching that, which is actually not all that difficult to do. And I think I may do a video on that in the future, but yeah, so, but when it comes to staining and then putting a top coat on, it's totally okay to go water, then oil, or oil, then water. Um, it's totally fine. What kind of finish should you use outdoors? Good question. Outdoor finishes, you've got to be careful with. You definitely want to get something that is made for outdoors that is going to hold up. Um, the sun, the wind, water, the sun alone will wreak havoc on wood and finishes of almost all types. There are certain things that are not intended for exterior use that do perform better outdoors. For example, gel stains. Gel stains actually do tend to hold up better in exterior conditions. Even the general finishes, it says indoor use only on the can. I generally would stick to that. and try not to stain outdoor projects, or with interior stain at least. But it does tend to hold up better outdoors. As far as the top coats are concerned, there's some different things out there. Most of what's out there that you'll find from different brands is some sort of acrylic sealer. It's usually water based these days. It's got UV blockers in it. It'll hold up fine. It is not going to give you the kind of hard interior seal coat that you may be used to with, like, if you use a lot of polyurethanes, things like that. Um, those top coats tend to be a little bit, for lack of a better word, softer. Um, and it's not really that noticeable. I mean, if you're applying it properly, you shouldn't have a really built up coating of this stuff. 3 coats, it's still going to be pretty minimal. What I mean when I say soft is that, like, if you ran your fingernail across it, like, you could see it would leave a bit of an indentation, which is actually beneficial. It is less prone to scratching and abrasion because of that. Because it's got flexibility, it'll kind of settle back into shape. So that is pretty much all there is to it. If you're going to be doing an exterior project, use an exterior finish, obviously. But there are times, like if you're doing a front door or something, where it's not going to be blasted with sunlight all day, every day, and it's in a covered area. It's not going to be, rained on and things like that. It You could use a gel stain reasonably and expect it's probably going to hold up okay. What's the easiest top coat and sealer to use? What should I use? What's not going to give me a bunch of issues and a hard time? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is one where it is going to take a little bit of practice. Some things are going to be easier than others. Wipe on polys, things like that. Very easy to use these days. You've got oil-based and water-based, each with their own benefits. I've found oil-based polyurethanes to be seemingly a little bit more durable than water-based. Water-based is significantly faster because you can put on several coats in a day. It dries so much quicker. But polyurethanes in general are pretty straightforward. Wipe on, you're pretty much only going to find an oil based, and wipe on is very easy to work with. There are even gel polyurethanes now. Those are by far the easiest, in my opinion. But all I've ever seen those in is in a satin sheen. So if you're looking for something glossier, you may have to go with just your regular liquid wipe on poly. I think the trick, and where most people go wrong with wipe ons, is they don't wipe off the excess. And they end up with an uneven finish or something, that because they're trying to build it up. People seem to like that kind of epoxy, that thick, glassy finish look. And if you're going to do that, you should just go and use an epoxy, because it's going to be a nightmare trying to build up a wipe on poly to that level. Really, almost any polyurethane. It's going to be a huge pain, and it's not worth it. Wipe off your excess, give it time to cure in between coats, and you will get much nicer results out of those finishes. Then you've got things like lacquers. Lacquers are something I used to hate. I used to hate lacquer. It gave me so many problems. I'd get what's called blushing, where it would get this white look. Because I'd use, like rattle cans of Mohawk or Deft lacquer, and it was just, it sucked, and it didn't seem to like cure hard enough, and I just hated the stuff. Since then, though, I've really 180'd on lacquer. Lacquer is actually a great finish. Downside is it's very chemically. You definitely want to have good, and this really applies to almost all finishing. You want to have good ventilation. You want to be wearing a respirator when you're working with any of this stuff. But lacquer especially, it's got a smell to it, and it'll reek up the room quickly. But the benefits of lacquer, uh, lacquer is what's called a coalescing finish, meaning that every layer of it that you apply melds in, becomes one with the previous layer. Other finishes, polyurethanes, acrylics, almost all other top coats are not like this. Only two really that are commonly used that will behave like this are lacquer and shellac. Lacquer is going to be more durable than shellac, but lacquer, it all becomes one. The benefit of this is if you ever have to repair something down the road, it's super easy. You just spray on more lacquer, it's going to become one with the original finish, and you're good to go. It is easy to buff if you want to polish it out. Yeah, lacquer just all around very easy to use. It can be finicky at times if you're not used to it. Play around with it a little. It can be quite a pleasant finish to use once you're not intimidated by it. So I'd love to talk more about all kinds of different stuff when it comes to finishing, but I'm running low on recording time here. I've got like under 2 minutes left. So if you want to know more about finishing and details, the number one best resource all around that I could give you is Bob Flexner's book, anything by Bob Flexner on finishing. Tons of information. Most of what I've said in here and more you can find in there. It's the book I was trained with on finishing, and it's an amazing resource. So I'd highly recommend it. Anyway, good luck with your finishing endeavors, and have a good one.